Hello again, everyone. You guys know the drill by now, so I am just going to cut to the chase. Let's open up our logbook, and we're doing Stygian today. So, starting with Tethys, I'm going to look at her upgrades first, and then move on to the cards themselves. So, before I get into it, though, I'm going to talk a bit about what Stygian does, what they're good at, what they're not good at, and to start with, I think Stygian is the strongest faction, and there's almost no competition there. And the reason for that is, what are they good at? Everything. What are they bad at? Nothing really. They cover all their bases pretty well, and they have some of the best cards in the game for doing all this stuff. And that all starts right here with Tethys. So we got Chillwind, which doesn't give her bonus HP, but stacks Frostbite on hit and gives her a ton of attack damage. We got Conduit, which reduces cost of damage spells on the floor, and we got Handheld Totem, which gives her Sweep and Spell Weakness 1 when 1 through 3 when she hits stuff. So I'm going to start by talking about Conduit. This one is probably the weakest out of these. I can't imagine you would ever want more than a single level in this, because just 1 point in this is more than enough to solve your mana issues for most of the run. There's no need to put more than a single point in here. Going up to 2 is very questionable, and all the way up to 3 is just way too much. You can use this to make stuff like Excavation Eruption castable when it normally wouldn't be, so there's that, but overall, I think the other two upgrade paths are just so strong that this ends up not being worth it. Next, we're going to look at Chillwind. So, at max level, this is doing 40 frost damage on hit. This is a big deal because Tethys only takes up 1 space, and this right here is strong enough to kill every boss in the game if you can stick a tanky dude in front of her. That's a big deal. The downside here is you only have 3 HP, so you're susceptible to losing your Tethys to pretty much everything. But Stygian has a lot of ways to get around this, which is really great. So I do like this one quite a lot. It's the one I take most often, I believe, because it's just a free guarantee that I'm going to have enough damage to kill every boss if I can keep her alive. And it only takes up 1 capacity, which means you don't have to upgrade your capacity sometimes on Stygian, though you probably should just for consistency at least once. But since she only takes up 1 capacity on a floor with 5 capacity, you can stick her behind two capacity dudes, and that works out pretty good, or behind a 2 capacity dude and a totem or whatever. It's really good. Handheld Totem has a lot of the same upside, except this version comes with built-in extra HP, which does mean you don't have to worry as much about losing Tethys. It also gets Sweep, but unless you're going to be putting Quick on her somehow, which you're probably not, the Sweep isn't a big deal in terms of the attack damage. It is, however, a big deal because you are going to be applying spell weakness to pretty much everyone. One of the big downsides with this version is you cannot reasonably put this on the top floor because it won't really do anything. Also, you need to have a way of ensuring that you're going to have a big damage spell to kill bosses after you've applied all the spell weakness. Some of my favorites are Helical Crystallysis. That one's pretty easy to find. There's also Ice and Pyre. You put Permafrost on those, and they do enough damage to kill most, well, every boss if you can stack enough spell weakness. This is a little bit weaker against Cleanse Seraph, same with the Frostbite version over here, but they're still both good enough that it doesn't really matter that much. Especially since you're going to be using it mostly during the boss phase. for that purpose, and it's going to be pretty good there. The spell weakness version also helps a little bit with clearing out backline ads that just happen to sneak through because you haven't set up a consistent AoE package during the run yet. So that's nice. But I would not rely on that, especially in the late game, since if you're having to do this and it doesn't have quick, Shade Wings are just going to tear through your front line. That's no good. So Chillwind, very good. Handheld Tome, very good. Conduit, kind of mediocre. In terms of mixing these, you can mix and match Chillwind and Handheld Tome, but I think it's more effective just to go all in on one or the other. So let's move to cards. We got Common, Stygian. Alright. First up, we got Energy Siphon. Applies spell weakness 1 to an enemy unit. And spell weakness for free, it's pretty decent. This means you're doubling the damage on the next spell that's hitting that unit, which can be very good. It's also a zero cost spell, so it helps fuel Incant. It lowers the overall cost of your deck, so that you have a better reason to take draw power as your major boss artifact. And that's really nice. This is just, it's not the most impactful spell. It's not super impressive, but it's just a nice addition to most Stygian decks. The extra spell weakness on a frontliner in conjunction with a really big damage spell can make it way easier to take out some of the big tanky dudes in the front. Next up, we got Offering Token. So you draw one, you discard one. You're not actually gaining any card advantage off this. You're not getting through your deck faster. You're actually losing cards to this because you're using 2 cards to draw 1 card, and you're not getting deeper in the deck because you could have just not taken Offering Token and you would have drawn the card that you're going to draw off the Offering Token instead. That being said, this is still a pretty good card in Stygian. If this were in other factions, it wouldn't. It would be a terrible card, but since it's in Stygian, it's good for a few reasons. First off, the obvious. This lets you discard one, and that's a very big deal for cards like Crypt Builder and Titan's Tooth and some other ones we'll get into later on. Additionally, it's a zero cost spell, so it triggers Incant. Incant is very important in Stygian. Having zero cost spells that you can just throw out to get Incant triggers rolling is a big deal. And it's one of the things that makes the faction the most powerful, because through the use of Incants, you can do literally anything. That's why Stygian's so good, because there's an Incant dude for every function except for... Actually, no, there is one for major AoE, but Stygian has even better ways to do AoE than this. But yeah, Incants are very good. This triggers Incants for free, essentially, at the cost of 1 card, I guess. But usually on higher covenants, you're going to have at least 1 card in your hand that's just no good to you, so you can discard like a Dead Weight or a Frozen Lance that you're just not going to play. So it's fine in that sense, but the fact this triggers Incant makes it pretty solid. Now we got Flash Freeze, 1 mana for 3 damage and Frostbite 8. This is a pretty solid card in the early game, and it falls off a little bit in the later parts of the game, but it's still decent. So before you have your reliable damage setup for AoE clearing ready to go, this goes a long way towards helping you clear out stuff in the backline. It lets you take out the crossbow dudes in the early stages and similar stuff later on. But once you have your reliable AoE damage setup, this transitions into a card that you can use to help damage bosses because of the Frostbite 8, as well as help take out tankier units because the Frostbite's going to do more damage to them as they move up the train. So good early, decent late. It's not the greatest, it's not the most impressive, but it's only common, so you can only ask for so much. Next up, we got Frozen Lance, which is our starter card. Unfortunately, this is one of the worst starter cards. 6 damage to the front enemy unit. Usually this is going to be hitting like a frontline tank, and against those, 6 damage isn't a huge deal. This does trigger Incant, but it costs 1, so that's not a huge deal either. Yeah, there's not a ton to say here. Usually I'll end up removing these or trying to stick plus 20 damage and consume on them just to make them somewhat impressive with a little bit of spell weakness and get them out of deck the second cycle through during a fight. But overall, not a terribly impressive starting card compared to some of the other ones. Now we got Titan's Gratitude. This card's okay. It's okay during the early game. If you're not running spell weakness, it falls off kind of hard in the late game because the 25 damage to Gilded Wings and the like just isn't that much. It's just not a ton of damage. The discard at random is a little bit awkward too, because sometimes you'll be in a situation where you don't have enough mana to play out most of the stuff in your hand, but you need to get something like a Titan's Tooth or a Crypt Builder out there, and you have the Titan's Gratitude, and then it's like, oh god, should I gamble with the Titan's Gratitude, or what should I do? What should I do? Because you have no idea what's going to happen here, so it's kind of unreliable in that sense. There are, of course, situations where you can get your hand down to just Titan's Gratitude plus this plus offering card, and in those cases, it's pretty solid. However, overall, this one's kind of on the mediocre end in terms of Stygian cards. Now we got Helical Crystallysis, which is essentially tacking 2 Titan's Gratitudes on top of each other and reducing the discard clause. Since this is only one spell, it's pretty good with spell weakness because both hits from the Helical Crystallis will benefit from the spell weakness. So if we have spell weakness 5 on a guy, this will do 300 damage, which is pretty substantial. In fact, just 1 or 2 stacks of spell weakness is enough to chunk frontline DPS. Or, no, I mean the frontline tanks that get sent at you even in the late game. So it's pretty good for that. The cost is a little bit prohibiting here. Usually you're going to be inclined to put spell power on this, but I think it's a better call to put 1 spell power upgrade and 1 cost reduction upgrade on these just to smooth out your mana requirements a bit. These common Stygian cards are all kind of, there's not a ton to talk about them because for the most part they're just damage spells. But let's move on to Crypt Builder. So Crypt Builder, 3 mana offering, meaning if you discard it from your hand before the end of the round, it gets played for free. And when you play a card via offering, all the stuff that would happen as if you had played it conventionally still happens. So if you put a consumption upgrade on this, it still consumes. If you have incant stuff, it still triggers those, etc., etc. So anyway, deals 60 damage to the front enemy unit and pushes it to the back. The 60 damage is the main reason we're here. 60 damage is a ton, especially with spell weakness builds. It's a lot of damage. So it's got that going for it. The pushing stuff to the back part doesn't come up all the time, but when it does come up, it can be pretty relevant. The fact that it has this added flexibility makes it a pretty solid card. However, you do preferably need to have ways to get the offering going. So the thing with offering and discard cards in Stygian is you got these common offering and discard cards, offering token signs, gratitude, crypt builder, and Titan's Tooth. If you start with offering tokens or Titan's Gratitudes, you're gonna take Crypt Builders and Titan's Tooth and the like more highly just to get just to milk mileage out of them. On the other hand, if you start with the offering cards in the deck, you're gonna take the offering tokens and Titan's Gratitudes more highly because then you can milk value that way. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid card for a common, especially. This is really nice because it has a lot of flexibility going on. The damage is great. It's better in the spell weakness builds than it is in the frostbite builds because those builds are really looking for stuff like this. Now we got Ice Tornado, which is pretty mediocre. It deals 20 damage to a random enemy unit 3 times. The way this is worded is a bit awkward. It's not picking a random unit and then doing all 3 instances to that. It's picking a random unit doing 20, picking a random unit doing 20, and then a third time. So there's a little bit of RNG built into this, but what really kills the card a lot of the time is the 3 mana cost. 3 mana is just too expensive for this. You can use this in spell weakness builds, but it's the same mana cost as Crypt Builder, and Crypt Builder has offering, and Crypt Builder doesn't have any RNG tied to it. This can clear backline units sometimes if you're lucky, but I wouldn't count on it. Overall, this one is definitely one of the weaker cards Stygian has access to, but it's just a common. Every faction has weak commons. I can't say a ton about it. The spell, it's also kind of weird with spell power because since it hits 3 times, you kind of want to put spell power on it, but it's not at that breaking point where spell power becomes really good on it. So it's just, it's okay. It's definitely below average in terms of Stygian cards. In fact, this is probably up in the running for worst Stygian card. But Stygian cards are very good in general, so that's not saying a whole lot. The card's still decent, and it can be good. Unfortunately, the combination of the high mana cost and the unpredictability of the spell kind of make it pretty lackluster. And the last common we got is Titan's Tooth. Titan's Tooth has a lot going on. It's got offering like Crypt Builder, so if we discard it, it gets played for free. And offering is just a very powerful keyword if I haven't made that clear already. And this, unlike Crypt Builder, is an AoE spell. It deals 5 damage to every enemy on the floor and applies Frostbite 10. The fact that this applies Frostbite 10 is kind of relevant because you can pop it on the first floor, clear the back line, and then have the Frostbite ticking down on the tanky frontliners to help clear those out. It's an okay card. It helps you with AoE. It's one that usually I'll take if I already got like a couple offering tokens, or I'll just start with it and look for offering tokens. All these cards are pretty easy to find. The fact that we have 2 offering cards and 2 discard cards at the common rarity means that usually you're going to be able to make these work. Because it's very rare you're going to have a run where you're not offered at least 1 offering token and at least 1 of each Crypt Builder and Titan's Tooth. That's very rare. Since these are common, they show up very often, and there's only 8 of them, since we don't count the Frozen Lands. So yeah, pretty solid overall card. It's very good AoE in the early game when you don't have something like a quick sweeper set up yet. Let's move on to the uncommons. Crystalline Seeds. Okay. So 0 mana, it consumes and applies Frostbite 6 to every enemy on the floor. That's a good card. It's really good in the early game because it helps you clear out these floors full of just backline crap before you have a more long-term approach to it. And it's okay in the mid game after you've got that figured out, because the Frostbite 6 does still help make sure that you have a way to clear them every time, and it also does a little bit of extra damage to bosses over the course of those fights. It does 7, it does 21 damage, I believe, to bosses. And against the big tanky guys in front, it helps chunk those down a bit. Going all the way up to 3rd floor, it will do 5 plus 6 is 11, 15 damage to them. It's not great. Definitely not great, but it's okay for 0 mana. This is one, I didn't note this in the other videos, but this is the card that shows up for the Stygian option on the Collapsing Train event. So if you're playing another faction, keep in mind that if you get that event and one of the options is Stygian, you can get this card for sure. Actually, no, it's not for sure. I think it's a 50-50 shot between this and Urchin Spines. Alright, next up we got Preserve. Oh, also, like I said earlier, it's a 0 mana spell, so it's good with incants. Now we got Preserve. It's got Permafrost, meaning it gets frozen when it comes into your hand, and you can use it to apply Frozen to a card in your hand. So I really like this card for a number of reasons. First off, like with all this other 0 mana stuff, it triggers incants, and this one, since it has Permafrost, you can use it to trigger incant when you need to. So that's very nice. The effect itself is also a very nice utility thing that's going to help you get a lot of cards that you want to have permafrost, specifically when you need them, if you can't get the permafrost upgrade on them anyway. So what I mean by that, because I word that kind of strangely. So you could take Preserve and use it to preserve, let's say, a Crypt Builder, to give that frozen, and then with the Crypt Builder, you can either wait until you draw your offering token to play it out for free, or you can save the Crypt Builder in your spell weakness build to kill the boss, not have to worry about draw RNG. So that's really nice. You can also use this on something like Frenzied Swarm or Drain or whatever. There's just a ton of ways to use this card. Hell, you can even use it on a unit to put on something like Tethys, because let's say you don't draw your frontliners for Tethys and you don't want to risk playing her out too soon, so you can preserve your Tethys on the first round and then play her out when you do have the frontline support for her. There's just a ton of stuff you can do with this card. I definitely recommend it. It's very good. Next up, we got Unnamed Tome. This one is kind of strange because the first time you read this card, you're going to have like no idea how good this is, because how can you know how good it is? Well, I'm here to tell you that this card is very good as well. Like Preserve, it's got Permafrost, meaning you can, and it costs 0, meaning you can use it to trigger incant stuff whenever you need to. It consumes, which is fine. But the Silence Clause, what does this mean? So triggered abilities. Off the top of my head, the triggered abilities in the game are Strike Effects, Incant, Slay, Extinguish, Revenge, and I feel like I'm missing one. Harvest. So what kind of enemies have... Oh, and also Resolve. I forgot Resolve. What kind of enemies does this affect? Well, this affects the dudes who put Scourges in your deck. It's good at that. Helps keep your hand nice and full, and you don't have to worry about the Scourges for a turn with this. It helps against the overcharged tanks and the Dark Wings by preventing them from using their harvest triggers, which can sometimes just make them too tanky to deal with. It prevents the Living Armor from using its Revenge trigger, which completely neuters the boss and turns it into kind of a joke, so it's good on him. It prevents the boss that puts Scourges in your deck from putting Scourges on your deck with the Slay effect. It's good for that. And on and on. It's good on all iterations of the Seraphite because one of them summons Pyre Wings. This is very good for those because it prevents them from putting Ember Drain on your guys. One of them summons Absolvers who put Scourges in your deck, and the Absolvers are super annoying because they are the tankiest backline units in the game, clocking in at 10 HP. So sometimes even if you have a good plan for backline stuff, they'll be just a little bit too tanky for it to deal with. So having an unnamed tome will prevent them from scourging up your deck for a round where it's really important that they not do so, and that's really nice. And against the last version of Seraph is going to be summoning Dark Wings who gain armor on Harvest. And it's really good for making sure they don't get too tanky. It's kind of a weird card to think about, but overall it's just a very good card because on most fights there's gonna be something that you want to be using this against. So, also against the Winged, they have the 5/3 dudes that's in the front and deal 5 damage to your front guy on Extinguish. It's good against those too. It's just good against a ton of stuff. And the fact that it's free and it has permafrost and triggers and can't as well just makes it a very nice card to have. I'll usually try to pick up one of these in all my Stygian runs because it just helps so much. Even though if it's not that impressive at first glance, it's just a very nice card to have. Next up, we got Urchin Spines, another 0 mana spell, which is to be expected because I guess I don't know how on earth I hadn't noticed this before, but these cards are sorted by mana cost. Okay, so Urchin Spines, 0 mana, consume, apply spell weakness to enemy units on the floor. That means, or spell weakness 2 means that the next damage spell that hits every unit on the floor is going to be doing triple damage if we don't factor in other spell weakness. Again, 0 mana spells, great with incants, because incant triggers are very powerful. Getting them for free is great. This is a decent candidate to use with Preserve because it lets you get that spell weakness down when you really need it. The damage you're going to be getting off this usually is going to be pretty substantial because spell weakness 2 is no joke. It's going to help you chunk frontline units. Even in a frost build, this is really good because where am I going? Where is it? Because usually you'll end up with like at least one Heal Crystallis or at least one Crypt Builder in the deck at some point. So in that case, the spell weakness 2 is turning this from 50 damage into 150 damage, which is very solid. Great card, I take it a lot, and it's another one that's not super impactful on the surface, but when you think about all the stuff it's doing for you, it's just a super efficient card. There's a lot of these efficient cards in the 0 mana slot going on here. Alright, on to 1 cost stuff. We got our first minion, first unit, Gold Celia. 1 mana, 2 capacity, 1/15 sweep, strike, apply frostbite 3 to the attacked unit. So this is going to swipe and do 1 damage and apply frostbite 3 to everything on the floor. I talked about sweepers in the Awoken video. Every sweeper is good just inherently because they have sweep. You put quick on them and it solves your AoE situation for the rest of the fight. With Cold Celia, the frostbite is it's okay. It's usually not a big deal. Usually what happens is I'll have a Cold Celia and something like a decent sized tank in front of her. I'll put Quick on her and some surplus attack upgrade. 15 health is just barely enough to not have to worry about putting a little bit of extra HP on her, so you can stick Quick and plus 10 attack on this, and that'll be great. You stick her behind the dude, and the Frostbite doesn't help a ton outside the boss. Before the boss, she's just here to sweep stuff, and that's great. But during the boss, presumably you've put a tankier guy in front of her, and what that's going to do is while the boss is bashing away at your tanky dude, the Cold Celia is going to be applying Frostbites. Frostbite's particularly good against bosses, so she does actually do a respectable amount of damage to the boss. It's not going to be enough to kill the boss, definitely not, but it is going to take a pretty decent chunk out of them. So I like this card quite a bit. If I see it and I don't already have another very reliable solution to AoE damage, then yeah, I'm taking it. Kettle Hex, end of turn applies Frozen to a random card in your hand. It's 1 mana, 1 capacity, 5/2. This seems like the kind of card that should be good. It feels like it should be good, but it's just so awkward to use a lot of the time. Its biggest issue is the fact that we have to actually get it out there, and then we have no idea what it's going to do. It could frostbite something like a dead weight, and that's no good. Or it could frostbite exactly what we need it to frostbite, and then it's really good. It only has 2 HP, so if you're using this kind of card, you do need to upgrade with a bit of HP. Just make sure it doesn't die to sweepers or thorns or whatever. So you do need to dump some upgrades into this. It does have 5 attack, which is okay. It's not great. The thing is, usually you're going to be wanting to stick this on a floor besides your primary floor, so like maybe you'll stick this on a supplemental floor, and that's fine. We do have to draw the card, which does kind of detract from the value. The biggest thing with this, though, also, by the way, this is considered a token, not a unit, so this shows up on normal draft picks, not unit draft picks. It's okay. I like it more than the Chandlers. Well, besides the Shard Chandler, I like it more than Edge Prior and Wildwood Custodian, but those cards aren't terribly good. This card's just okay. You can use it to get some nice stuff going on with Frozen, but there's better ways to apply Frozen than stuff like upgrades or preserve, or there's the one artifact that does literally this. And I do think that artifact is quite good. This card's kind of eh. It's just okay, kind of mediocre. Now we got Drain. Drain, it's going to apply Sap 3 to a dude and discards a card at random. I like Drain a lot. This is a very solid utility spell. Usually what I'm using Drain for is to either... Okay, so Drain, usually I'm looking for Frozen on this. Like, I want to get a Permafrost upgrade on it, or I want to hit it with a Preserve, or an Icicle Shard, I think it's called, the artifact that gives Frozen. I want to get Frozen on it somehow, and the reason for this is because this card, kind of like the Unnamed Tome, is very, very good at shutting down certain problem enemies. It's good at shutting down the Masters of Light, which are the big sweepers that the Eclipse have, and preventing them from killing Tethys. It's good at that. It's good at shutting down Pyre Wings, because if they have 0 attack, they can't apply Frostbite to your... or not Frost. They can't apply Ember Drain to your stuff if they have 0 attack. It's good at shutting down multi-strikers, because Sap's, in general, very, very good against multi-strikers. It can give you that extra tankiness you need against the boss to make sure that you're can be able to survive an extra turn or two, and so on and so on. It's just a very solid utility card, but you do want to find a way to get frozen onto it, because if it doesn't have frozen, you can just draw it when it's not necessary and then not have it when you don't need it, and then it's not great. But if you do have a way to get frozen on this, it's very good because you'll always have it during those super specific cases where you really do need it. Because something like a unchecked Pyre Wings applying Ember Drains all your stuff can actually just end your run. Losing your Tethys to a random sweeper can just end your run. This prevents that from happening. And now we got Frenzied Swarm. Frenzied Swarm is a very good card. It's better than Drain, I think. And much like Drain, you do also want to try to apply Frozen to this somehow, but if you can't, it's fine too, because the card's just so good in general. So there's two things going on here. One applies daze to enemy units. That's great. It's completely shutting down that all the enemies on the floor for one turn. That means that sweepers aren't a problem. Your tank doesn't have to worry about taking damage. Your stuff doesn't have to worry about getting ember drained or anything like that. It's very good for that. The other part is it discards your hand. This is actually an upside most of the time, because this means that you're going to be playing this, and every single offering card in your hand is going to get played as well. It's a very good way of triggering offerings because it triggers all the ones you have in hand. So that's great. Very, very good card. Great utility spell. Highly recommend taking it. Try to get frozen on it. It's good in all the same cases. Drain's good. It's good at shutting down problem units. It's good at making your tanks more resilient, etc., etc. It's good at dealing with offering stuff. It's just a great card. Now we got Glacial Seal. I'm not a huge fan of Glacial Seal. It's the first incant card we've got here, though. So incant means whenever you cast a spell on the floor, you're going to trigger the incant effect. And the incant effect for this is Frostbite 2. This does only have 1 HP. It's 1 cost. It takes up 1 capacity, 0 attack. You do need to find a way of making this more resilient if you're going to be playing with it, like sticking plus HP on or something. Stygian has a incant gain 1 armor upgrade available to them. Usually that's going to go on my totems like this, because it's usually not as high impact as the plus 25 HP upgrade. But I do need to put something on my totems to keep them alive, and that's going to do just fine. So applying Frostbite 2 to enemies is not the greatest incant trigger, because if you're using this as an AoE solution, the Frostbite isn't going to proc until after the enemies have done damage, so that's not ideal. Against bosses, the 2 Frostbite per spell cast is also not the greatest. Like, on an incant floor, there's nothing wrong with this card. The problem with it is just there's better things you can be doing with the capacity. Like, there's just way better cards you can be putting in its place, and that's the big issue here. That being said, it's not a bad card. It's actually a pretty solid card. The thing is that Stygian is just so stacked with powerful cards that this ends up being kind of mediocre in comparison. Next up, we got Guard of the Unnamed. So this one I do like quite a lot. Incant, gain 3 armor, 1 mana to capacity 515. This is one of the 2 major tanks Stygian has access to. We'll get to ER1 shortly, I'm sure. Actually, I'm sure it's probably the next card on the the first card on the next page over here, because they both start with the G. So anyway, Incant gain 3 armor. Usually with Incant stuff, you're going to be putting all your Incant dudes on the same floor, because obviously that lets you get value off every Incant card you have off the same spell. This is the de facto Incant tank. You stick this guy at the front of your Incant floor, and he's just this impassable wall that the enemies are going to have such a hard time getting through. He gains 3 armor whenever you incant, so every single spell you play on that floor is making him tankier and tankier. You're going to want to put plus HP upgrades on him if you hit a critical mass of incant spells. You're going to want to put plus 1 armor on incant on him as well, just to make him even better with incant triggers. So the point where this starts becoming pretty absurd is if you're casting... Actually, let's compare him to Steelworker from Hellhorn. Where is Steelworker? Here he is. He's got exactly the same stats, but instead of Incant gain 3 armor, he's got Resolve gain 5 armor. So if you're playing more than 1 spell per turn on this floor, Guardian names are already better. And we're Stygian, so 2 spells a turn is kind of already in the realm of you're going to be doing more than that, right? Because that's what Stygian does. It casts spells. These incant triggers are very good with Awoken, as I believe I mentioned in that video, because Awoken has stings, which are just spectacular with incant. This is pretty much always going to be better than Steelworker. It combos very, very well with the hammer that Hellhorn can get, and the one that makes it so you gain plus 4 armor whenever you apply armor. That one's very good with this. Overall, he's just a super tanky guy that's going to keep your backline incant units safe. Next up, we got Guardian Stone. It's okay. It's kind of another one of the weaker totems, but I think it's better than the Frostbite totem. So this one gives incant apply armor one's friendly units. So unlike the Frostbite totem, this one has built-in protection from sweepers and the like. And it also protects your other backliners from that stuff, so that's nice. It makes it so that you can put other upgrades on your backliners, so instead of putting plus 5 attack plus 10 HP on a backliner, you can just put plus 10 attack on them. That's great. It helps keep your stuff resilient, protects against sweep, and it also helps keep your frontline tank just more resilient. It's a good card. Again, the biggest issue with it is there are better tomes and better stuff you can be doing with your space some of the time. But overall, this is a solid card, and it's going to do great work in an incant setup. Next up, we got Ice Storm. It deals 1 damage to a random enemy unit 5 times. Obviously, the play with this one is putting spell power upgrades on it. It's great when you do that. Much like Ice Tornado, it is hitting randomly on every hit. So keep that in mind. But once you get to spell power upgrades on this, it'll be doing a total of 105 damage, which is definitely on the high end. So this card's solid, but actually, in the super early game, this does one-shot all of the backliners. It one-shots clergymen, crossbow dudes, and healers. So that's great, but once you get to the clipped enemies, you do need to have some upgrades in it, because those guys have 2 HP, which makes the Ice Storm significantly worse. And by that point, you're probably going to be looking for a more reliable way to deal with backliners anyway, so this transitions from a strong AoE spell in the early game to a strong single target damage spell in the mid to late game. AC Silophyte, the other sweeper we got. This one has 5 less HP, and instead of Frostbite, it's applying spell weakness. So 10 HP is getting a little bit sketchy. It means this gets two-shotted by Masters of Light, which can be a real problem. So you probably do want to get an HP upgrade on this, unlike the Cold Celia. So keep that in mind. Usually you're going to be looking for +5, +10, and quick on this one. That's going to deal with almost every backline unit except for the Absolvers that the last two floors can spawn at you. But the big selling point here is instead of the 2 Frostbite from the Cold Celia, which is kind of underwhelming, we're getting 1 stack of spell weakness. So that means that in addition to clearing out all the backline stuff, this stinker is going to apply spell weakness to frontline dudes, making it so that you can deal double damage to them with something like a Crystallis or a Crypt Builder. So this is a sweeper that kills all the backline stuff, and then it helps significantly towards damaging the frontline stuff as well. It's a very good card. I think it's one of the better cards in the game. Of course, only ever take one of these. Taking more than one is redundant. But yeah, Icy Silophyte, very powerful card. I highly recommend taking it. It's, in my opinion, the best sweeper in the game. The Awoken ones do have stuff going for them as well, like the Husk Hermit has the large HP pool, which makes it really resilient against damage, obviously. And like the Husk Hermit, unlike these, you can just use its tank for itself. With Icy Silophyte and Cold Celia and the Shattered Shell, you do need to put someone in front of it. And the Shattered Shell does have damage scaling, but I think of these, Icy Silophyte is the best, followed by Husk Hermit, followed by Shattered Shell, and lastly, Cold Celia is the worst one of these. Well, actually, no. No, I think Shattered Shell is the worst sweeper, and Cold Celia is the second worst. Yeah, because this helps more during boss fights, and it has a bit more HP. That's the order I'm going to rate the sweepers in now that we've seen all of them. However, keep in mind, just having sweep at all immediately makes a card very, very powerful. So just because one sweeper is better than another one doesn't mean that the other sweeper is a bad card. It's still a very, very good card. But yeah, I think Icy Silophyte is the best of sweepers, which in turn makes it, in my opinion, one of the best cards, period. Next up, we got Mollusk Mage. 1 mana, 7/1, +7 magic power on the floor. Usually you're going to be wanting to use this in conjunction with spell weakness on Tethys. And that's going to be kind of awkward a lot of time because the 1 HP on this means we have to first off put an HP upgrade on it to protect it from sweepers and the like, or just random BS happening for whatever reason. And we also have to put a beefier guy in front of it most of the time, so we have to invest quite some resources into getting the Mollusk Mage to work. If we're using it that way, the +7 magic power is decent for 1 mana. It's not the best thing ever. That's less than a magic power upgrade gives, but this affects every spell, so that's pretty decent. 7 damage is starting to push into the range of being pretty decent for 1 capacity unit. It's approaching the same stat level as Morsel Master, which we'll talk about during the Umbra video. But I think this card's just average. You can take it or leave it. You can stick it on your primary floor, and that's okay, I guess. But again, it falls into the issue of the Stygian cards are so good that a card like this just kind of gets left in the dust. Now we got Nameless Siren. This one has and can't gain Rage 1. And it has 15 HP, meaning that it's just tanky enough that you don't have to worry about sweepers too much with it. Usually, how good this is depends on, of course, how often you can trigger the incant. But unlike the other incant cards, you do need to reach at least a certain amount of incant for this to be good. Otherwise, if you're casting like 1 or 2 spells per turn on the incant floor, this is no good because the rage is just gonna burn off and it's not gonna be able to scale. However, if you do reach a critical mass of incant synergy, this card becomes very, very strong. 15 HP means that you don't have to put HP on it, because it's probably not going to die to sweepers. However, it can still die to thorns, which is kind of annoying, but if that's the case, just don't take those challenges. So, in terms of upgrades on this, you want at least 1 multi-strike. Usually I end up putting multi-strike and plus an attack on it, but if I get really lucky, I can sometimes find 2 multi-strikes put onto it, and that ends up being really good. This thing just shreds through bosses. It shreds through frontliners. It shreds through everything if you can reach that critical mass of incant spells. It does kind of fill the same role as Tethys, but in the later parts of the game against the Winged, Tethys by herself is not enough single target damage to get through all of the tanks that are going to be thrown at you. So having a card like Nameless Siren ready to go is going to help a lot there, because even after just a couple incant triggers, it's going to be doing 30, 40, 50 damage a hit, and it's just going to get better from there. So yeah, I definitely like this card a lot. Next up, we got a very similar card in the form of Siren of the Sea. So Siren of the Sea only has 10 HP, however, her built-in HP scaling also means we don't need to put HP upgrades on her. I would not recommend using this as a tank because there are just better tanks available to the Stygian. However, this is still a solid card. Nameless Siren and Siren of the Sea are, for the most part, interchangeable. However, if you don't have the critical mass of incant spells, the Siren of the Sea is better, because she doesn't lose her scaling power when you don't have enough incant triggers. So you kind of use the Nameless Siren and the Siren of the Sea in the same role, and generally you look for the same upgrades on them. Really, with these, if I'm in the market for this kind of card, I'll just take whichever one shows up first. Sometimes it's this one, sometimes it's this one. It's really up to luck. If I'm offered both of them at the same time and I want one of them, then it depends how often I'm going to be triggering incant. If I'm only going to trigger it like twice, maybe 3 times a turn, if I'm lucky, then Siren of the Sea is the superior card. However, if I'm triggering it all the freaking time, Nameless Siren ends up being the better card. So keep that in mind when you're choosing between these, but most of the time you won't have to choose between them, you'll just take whichever one comes up first. Now we got Titan Sentry, the last uncommon unit here. It's a 1 mana, 0/35 Revenge, apply Frostbite 3 to enemy units, and it takes up 2 spaces. This is yet another way for Stygian to deal with the AoE situation reliably. You stick this on the bottom floor, slap HP upgrades on it, and it's just gonna kill all the backline stuff with its revenge effect. Much like the Cold Salia, it's also very good against bosses because the bosses are just going to be hitting this, and stacking frost and stacking frost. And like I said, frost is very good against bosses. Usually this ends up being like, okay, usually either this ends up in front of a sweeper to protect the sweeper and help chunk the boss even more when they show up, or it ends up at the front of an encant line or something else, wherever a tank is needed. Like, this dude's just so flexible. You just put him wherever a tank is needed, and he'll be great. The fact that he can do that and only take up 2 capacity, and also deal with all the backline stuff if he's put on the bomb floor, makes him really flexible. You can use him as a front line to a backline somewhere in your lineup. You can use him as an AoE solution. You can use him to protect your other AoE solution or whatever. It's just a very solid, very flexible card. And it's one I've never been disappointed with. Every time I take Titan Sentry, it's good. Like, it pulls weight very well. The last uncommon card we got is Guardian's Amulet. I think this is also the last offering card here. So this one, 3 mana, offering, apply sap 3 to enemy units. Okay, so this is one that, much like Drain, I want Permafrost on. And it's actually pretty good with Permafrost because it's going to be doing all the same stuff that Drain is doing, but it's also protecting you against brick draws. If something happens and you can't clear out the backline, this is going a long way towards preventing the enemy backline from just shredding you. It also shuts down all the same stuff that Drain shuts down, and since it has offering, that will come up sometimes, but what I found is this card, usually I'll take it, but it's not that often I end up triggering the offering on it, because offering is kind of a opportunistic thing, and Guardian Amulet is more of a card where I want it in very specific scenarios, and usually I don't happen to get the opportunity to cast it as an offering and have it be super relevant at the same time. That being said, just the fact that this applies sap in and of itself makes it a good card. Any way to apply sap is powerful. Unfortunately, this just happens to be on the more medium end of the sap cards, but the card is still very good. Let's move on to rares. Our first rare is Spike of the Stygian. I used to not care a ton for this card, but nowadays I actually like it quite a bit. The Frostbite's mostly irrelevant. We're just here for the sap, really. There's a few things you can do with this. Actually, not a few. There's only like 1 or 2 things you can do with this. But firstly, we're mostly here for the sap. You put permafrost on this or give it frozen in some fashion, and you use it in all the same ways you use Drain. And it's great for that. Additionally, the little bit of Frostbite can help you deal with backline units, so that's decent. It's also really good with the Broken Horn, the one that lets you carry over mana between turns. You can use this as your sole strategy for killing bosses. If you put permafrost on it and you have that artifact, then this answers the question of how are we going to tank boss damage, because you can just stockpile mana and then play the spike on the boss when he shows up, and the sap's just going to be too much for them to deal with. It is a little bit clunky to use sometimes, I will admit, but once again, Sap is so powerful that I'm willing to overlook some of the problems with the card. Now we got Harness the Titan. This is one I'm not sure about because the way this is worded, I would think that the enhancement lasts for the whole fight. But every time I've tried using this card, that hasn't been the case. It just lasts through that turn. If that's the case, this card's pretty mediocre because it's a 1-cost spell that is doing literally nothing if you don't have damage spells in your hand to go with it. And even if you do have damage spells in your hand, you have to play the Harness Titan, then you have to play the damage spells, and at that point, that's the whole turn. And how much damage are you realistically getting out of this? Not a ton most of the time. Usually you're going to get, like, at most 15 to 20 unless you got a multi-hitting spell. For a rare, this is just super underwhelming. It's definitely on the weaker end of stuff that Stygian can be doing. And I just don't care much for this card. I'd much rather have other cards that aren't such a pain to make good. There's just too many hoops to jump through with this. Now we got Ice and Pyre. One moment, please. I need to wet my throat. Okay. Okay. Ice and Pyre. It has Pyrebound, meaning you can only cast it in the room below. You can only cast it on the top floor. I don't know why or how you would ever cast this in the Pyre room. In fact, I don't even think you can cast stuff in the Pyre room, but that's whatever. So, you can only cast this on top floor, but it's 1 mana for 90 damage to the front enemy unit. This is super efficient. Also, I think Pyrebound is a Stygian exclusive mechanic. I don't think any other factions have Pyrebound stuff. So, how good is this? This is yet another spell we want to put Frozen on somehow. Because it's another one of these very opportunistic cards. It's only going to be very good sometimes. Sometimes it's going to do literally nothing. But when it is very good, it is remarkably powerful. Usually, the most common use case for this is you find a way to apply Frozen to it, you freeze it, then you're using spell weakness Tethys to stack a bunch of spell weakness on the boss, and you use Ice and Pyre to kill them, because this is one of the best damage rates on a spell in the game. There are some spells that can do more damage, but just baseline, this is the best you're going to get for the mana cost. So very good card. However, much like a lot of other Stygian cards, you do want to find Frozen for it. Now we got Lodestone Totem. This card right here, is absolutely busted. It is just nuts how powerful this is. So, this has 2 of the most powerful keywords in the game, Incant and Sap. When you put these together, it results in just this monstrous card where if you can get enough Incant triggers, it does literally everything you need to do. Also, since it's applying sap to stuff, you don't need to worry as much about finding a way to put extra HP on this, but I do still recommend it, because if you break your draw and end up losing the tome because of it, it'll really suck. So, let's go down the list of reasons this is so good. Firstly, it ensures that your backline stuff is never going to have to worry about sweepers ever again, because the Lodestone Totem sapping them, so they can't do anything. It ensures that you don't have to worry about Pyre wings, because if they can't hit your dudes because they have no attack, then they can't apply Ember Drain. Protects Tethys, protects itself, protects your frontliners, and because of the way SAP works, it also strangely provides kind of a solution to the big tanky dudes, because what you can do is you can put this stuff on the middle or top floor, and the big tanky gilded wings and the like, when they come around, you apply all the sap to them, you don't kill them quite, they get away with some HP, and then they go up to Pyre, and they can't do anything to Pyre because all of their attack has been sapped, so the Pyre just kills them for free. It's also spectacular against bosses, because the way sap works, once again, it prevents the boss from attacking for many turns in a row. It's kind of like regen in that case, and it prevents the sweep bosses from doing their sweepy stuff. It prevents the stealth boss from chunking your guys before the stealth wears off. It just does so much. This card's nuts. I take it almost every time I see it. I would need a very good reason not to take it, because the card is just absurdly powerful. Now we got Offering Monument. I've never won with this card, apparently. I think it's a neat card. It's definitely a neat card, but it's got some problems. This is kind of a draw engine for Stygian. In the normal circumstance, you're going to be drawing 8 cards with this, which is pretty good. It's a lot of cards, and unlike Edge Prior, you don't need to wait ages for the value to start kicking in. You can make this work when you need it to work. Like when you have excess mana, you can use this, draw a bunch of cards, and really dig for what you're looking for. The fact that the card draw happens so much faster makes this a lot better than Edge Prior. It's also probably worth mentioning that you can do some shenanigans with Awoken and this card to give it more HP and heal it and that kind of stuff, and that's going to let you draw even more cards off of it, and that can be pretty nice. The reason I think the reason I've never won with this is because usually I'll just be offered another rare next to it that I'd rather have, like the aforementioned Lodestone Totem or something else here. But I do think this is a decent card. Once again, the thing is that Stygian as a whole is so stacked, and they have so many powerhouse cards, that this just, even though it's a good card, you just end up not picking it because the other cards are even better. Now we got Siren Song, which I believe is the only other Pyre-bound card in the game besides Ice and Pyre. So this is another one, yet another card that you want to freeze. Get Permafrost upgrade on it, find a way to put Frozen on it, etc. You know the drill. This one ascends all enemy units on the floor and applies Daze 3. So you're sending them up to your Pyre with the Daze effect. It's pretty good with Iron Drop Cage, because that means you're at a point where you can one-shot pretty much everything except for bosses with this. So that's nice. By itself, this is going to be doing 60 damage in the early game, 120 damage, no, 90 damage in the mid game, and 120 damage in the late game. That's pretty solid for 1 mana. I think this card is a really good backup plan for if shit hits the fan. You can use it to clear out problem enemies that make it to the top floor and not have to worry about them. That's why you want to put Frozen on it, because it's only good in very specific scenarios, but in the scenarios where it's good, it's very, very good. So I do like this card quite a bit. and it's another contributing factor to why the aforementioned Preserve is such a good card, because Stygian has all these situational cards that are situationally busted, and being able to put Frozen on them is just so powerful. So next up we got Deep Offering. This one costs 2 mana, consumes, and you discard your hands, draw 5. So this is going to trigger all your offering cards, and it is going to get you deeper in the deck. Now, the fact it costs 2 mana is kind of a detriment from the card, but if you can get some cost reduction on it, it ends up being pretty strong. The biggest draw here is this allows you to dig through your deck way faster to find key cards. But getting the cost reduction upgrades on it is going to be very important, because paying the full 2 mana for this makes the card kind of pointless, because you're going to be spending most of your mana on Deep Offering anyway, at which point all this extra card draw is meaningless. But this card is pretty solid. I'd say it's about average in terms of Stygian stuff. It's mostly here for card draw, though the fact that it triggers offerings can be very nice in some circumstances. Gifts for Guard. You draw 3 spells and enhance them with Consume, plus 20 magic power, and 0 cost. This card's okay. It's one that I'm not a huge fan of. One of the biggest problems with it is the 3 spells you're drawing are totally random out of your deck, and you're not guaranteed to get spells that actually care about the magic power. So you can draw stuff like Siren Song or Spike is Stygian off this, and then it's like, what was the point of the magic power? But anyway, 2 mana for this effect, it can be pretty good. It can be pretty good. You're getting 3 spells for 2 mana. The fact that you can consume them can be a little bit problematic sometimes, but it's not a huge deal. Just put more spells in your deck, really. Overall, this one's kind of tough to evaluate because there's so much stuff that can happen with it. I think the card's not super good because of the combination of high mana cost and RNG. The random spells can either be very, very good or completely worthless, and you have no way to know which it's going to be until you actually play the card. So it's an interesting card. There's some shenanigans you can do with this. Like, you can use this to fish up a Ice Storm and give it plus 20 magic power, and that can be pretty decent. But overall, I think this card is just average in terms of Stygian stuff. Next up, we got Hoarfrost Effigy. Transfers all Frostbite on the floor to a unit, then doubles the amount. For 2 mana. For 2 mana. This card is okay. Obviously, it's terrible if you're not running a Frostbite, but that's the way a lot of cards are going to be. And, of course, you can look past that. So, how good is this card in a Frostbite build? It's just okay. It's not really going to help you deal with the tanky frontline dudes, because usually in these types of decks, you're not going to have enough time to apply enough Frostbite to them for something like the Hoarfrost Effigy to make a huge difference against them. So what you're really using this for is to kill major bosses. You're using this to kill primarily Fel and Seraph. And it's really good at that. However, my issue with it is Frostbite builds are already really, really good at killing bosses. Having this card in the deck just feels kind of overkill most of the time, because the added Frostbite, sure, it's going to make the boss way easier to deal with, but these Frostbite builds already have a really easy time dealing with bosses. Having this is just kind of win more. Yeah, you can do some pretty impressive damage numbers hypothetically if you get the right combination of stuff. You can use this to kill major bosses before they get to the final wave. And if you look at it that way, then this is kind of a roundabout way of dealing with the tanky dudes in front. But that's gonna be really hard to pull off a lot of the time. Overall, I think this card's a bit overrated. The problem I have with it is, like I said, Frostbite builds are already some of the best ways to kill a boss without this. Adding this in is diluting the other portions of your deck that you need to deal with other stuff just to make your one of your biggest strong points even stronger to a point that's kind of overkill. Not a huge fan, but I do see why people like this card. Finally, the last card we got is Ancient Synergy. For 3 mana, we deal damage to front enemy unit equals 2 times the number of spells in the deck 3 times. Okay, so how many spells do we need in the deck for this to be good? At 10 spells, this is about on par with Ice Tornado, so it's not very good yet. At 15 spells, no, that's not a good breaking point. Actually, yes, it is. At 15 spells, this is about as much damage as Ice and Pyre, but we're paying 3 times the mana cost, but it's not Pyre bound. So it's kind of getting decent at that point. At 20 spells, it starts approaching some pretty strong numbers. This is a solution to having a large damage spell to kill the boss in spell weakness decks. Or if you do hit just a huge amount of spells, you can use this to help clear out problem frontliners. I think this spell is kind of expensive for what it does. It's got the same problem, well, one of the same problems as Ice Tornado. Usually I don't pick this up for the same reasons I don't pick up Offering Monument a lot of time, because I would just need to stack my deck with so many spells for this to be worthwhile. I do like the card. It can be very, very nice to help deal with bosses in spell weakness decks where maybe your front line isn't quite resilient enough to get enough spell weakness stacks on the bosses for something weaker like a Helical Crystallis to work. But in most cases, this is a little bit too clunky and awkward to use. The combination of the spell count stipulation and the high mana cost just makes it kind of average to below average in terms of Stygian cards. So that's all the Stygian cards we got. Next time we're going to be looking at Umbra. To reiterate, I do think Stygian is the strongest faction by quite a bit, actually, because they have single target damage with their champion and some of this stuff. They have utility with permafrost and frozen and all this stuff. They have tanky dudes with the guard of the unnamed and Titan Sentry. They got AoE in the form of sweepers. Like, they just have so much going for it. They have good card draw in the form of Offering Monument and Deep Offering. And Sap is one of the strongest things in the game. So, yeah, great faction. If you're trying to climb Covenants, I recommend picking them up. They're very, very good, very consistent. They're strong at low Covenant, and they continue to perform well at max Covenant. So yeah, I definitely think they're a very powerful faction. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time on the Umbra video. Peace out.